Okay.
Hi, I'm Kathy Daneman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome to a discussion with our nominees for Best Paperback Original Novel. You can learn about upcoming Edgar panels by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2022 or by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. You can also watch the Edgar Awards live streamed on April 28th. It'll be live streamed on our YouTube channel. I will be posting a link to our panelists' nominated books in the chat. Today's bookseller is Murder by the Books in Houston, Texas. Throughout the conversation, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them toward the end of the hour. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Laura K. Curtis. Laura has never been able to focus on one thing at a time. Despite lecturing frequently on branding and its importance to authors, her own brand includes mysteries, thrillers, and romance. Her latest novel, A Darker Shade, is a gothic comparable to a Victoria Holt novel set in Stephen King's Maine. She can be found mouthing off on a variety of subjects on Twitter and on her website at laurakcurtis.com. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Yes, you won't find me at lauracurtis.com because the woman who owns that refuses to give it up, even though she's never actually put a website on it.
How unfair.
In Chicago, I know some people. I could maybe have them reach out, talk to them, explain.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I will start just alphabetically. I'm going to introduce each of the authors. David Bell. David, you want to wave just in case anybody can't see you or doesn't. I can't tell exactly how many people are looking at the screen. So is a USA Today best-selling author of 13 novels. A native of Cincinnati, Ohio, he now lives in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where he is a professor, not a professor, of English at Western Kentucky University. C.J. Cook is a poet and novelist published in 23 languages. Wow. Her latest novel, The Lighthouse Witches, is not Edgar nominated and international bestseller. Daryl Gregory is an award-winning writer of novels, short stories, and comics. His latest novels are Revelator and Spoonbender, both from Knopf. His other books include After Party, Pandemonium, We Are All Completely Fine, and the collection Unpossible and Other Stories. CS, and I'm just going to call you Carol because CS is a little weird in conversation. Carol Okaneda.
Very good.
I got it. The author of Petra's Ghost, a dark thriller set on Camino de Santiago and a semifinalist in the 2019 Goodreads Choice Awards. She's also the creator of the Candace Starr series, a tongue-in-cheek take on hard-boiled crime fiction with a feminist twist. As a blogger on her website, She Kills Lit, she features women writers of thrillers and noir, along with the occasional nasty true crime story. Carol lives in Guelph,
yeah.
With her Irish expat husband, who remains her constant muse. Alan Parks has worked in the music industry for over 20 years. His debut novel, Bloody January, was shortlisted for the Grand Prix de Littérature Policière. He lives and works in Glasgow. He was memorably described in a recent interview with the Herald as an amiable bear of a man who these days spends his time wandering around Glasgow thinking up ways to murder people. Alan has written and released 3 crime thrillers to date, all published by Canongate. And finally, Laura Purcell is, you think I know her name, right? Laura Purcell is a former bookseller turned author of historical and Gothic fiction. Her novels include The Silent Companions, which won the 2018 W.H. Smith Thumping Good Read Award. Okay, so, ladies and gents, if you couldn't tell by the the brief bios. One of the things that I think is most exciting about this particular group is that we have an enormous variety of styles and subgenres here. And what I'd like to ask you each to do is to tell us a little bit about your nominated book and what it's about, whether it's in a series, you know, all that stuff. And okay, who wants to start? How about Daryl?
Okay. Yeah. I have real trouble staying inside of one genre. I'm mostly a science fiction writer most of the time, and horror. And this book is, you know, your tired old idea of a locked room boy band pastiche of the album, The Island of Dr. Moreau. I sort of threw them all into a blender. So it's a genuine locked room mystery about a boy band who happens to be animal-human hybrids, and their manager is found clawed to death in his hotel suite, and they have to. One detective, who's also for some reason an ex-stage magician, has to solve the mystery. I just love fooling around with that stuff. I think it's because when I was a kid, you know, I read all the different genres. You know, loved Agatha Christie, loved science fiction, fantasy, all that stuff. And so when all those, and I never had really boundaries in my head about what I was supposed to be reading or not. So when I started writing, all those weird things in my head started having sex with each other and making strange babies. And that's what the books are.
Okay.
Not to lower that, I've just lowered the bar for the politeness of the room. I apologize.
That's all right. That's quite all right.
Genre sex so early.
You know, since we're talking music industry, Alan, how about you go next?
Yep, I'll try and speak slowly, so hopefully you'll be able to understand what I'm saying. This book is called The April Dead, which is in the Harry McCoy detective series. And
hang on a second. Hang on 1 second, because the one that was nominated is actually.
Have I got the wrong one?
It's the March one.
Bobby Marks Will Live Forever, the book I'm talking about, obviously, is a book about a rock. Is it also in the Harry McCoy series, luckily? And it's about a sort of rock star who's never quite made it as big as he could have done. His claim to fame is he was asked to join the Rolling Stones after Brian Jones left, and expecting to be the biggest star in the world. He turned it down, and he's regretted it ever since. So he comes back to Glasgow, performs a show, and is found dead of an overdose the next morning. As it turns out, the overdose might be a bit more complicated than it seems, and Harry goes back to his past, to the rock star's past in Glasgow, and tries to find out what's been going on.
Okay. So let me think now. Who? How about Carol?
No, it's good. Okay, that's me. Like Daryl, I seem to have trouble staying in any one genre, much to my publicist's chagrin. My first book was billed and promoted as literary and ended up being a finalist for a horror award. So I'm never quite sure what I'm doing. But in my second books, I started a series because I was told that my first book was not necessarily commercial enough, and I went upstairs and started writing a book about a 6'3" hit woman who kicks ass, and I said, "I'll show you bloody commercial." So Candace Starr was born. The book that is nominated is the second one in that Candace Starr series. Candace has her teenage half-sister show up, who she didn't know she had, and they go looking for her estranged mom in the Detroit mob. and silliness. Well, not necessarily silliness, because she's a little too violent for silliness. But anyway, witty stuff abounds, and so does a lot of violence and F-bombs. And that's basically the book that I wrote. Candace is kind of the avatar for any woman who ever wanted to kind of throw a bad guy up against the slushy machine in the 7-Eleven. And she's my alter ego. So that's what my book's
There
about.
you go. You're not 6 foot something though, yeah?
No, I have a daughter who's very tall, so she's kind of the one I based Candace on. But
okay.
yeah.
And so whereas Alan and Carol are both books in series, David and Laura are not. So let's go with Laura first. And Carolyn, your book's, yeah, Carolyn's book is not in the series either. So let's go with Laura first, since she went last time.
Thank you. So my book is The Shape of Darkness. It's historical Gothic, which kind of marries my love of costume drama with horror movies. And The Shape of Darkness is set in Victorian Bath. It follows Agnes, who's a silhouette artist, but her clients start to die in mysterious ways that seem to be predicted by the silhouettes she's cut of them. The police don't have any clues, so she consults a child spirit medium called Pearl. Her idea is that if she can contact the dead, she might be able to solve their murders. But she and Pearl soon start to find that they might have uncovered something they can't put back.
It's never a good idea to unlock that box. And Carolyn, CJ Cook, your book also has a sort of a fantastic element to it. Would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Is Carolyn here?
She is, isn't she?
I think Kathy just put up her picture.
Oh, okay. That's my problem. I didn't realize she wasn't actually here. Okay, so then we'll go to David. David, why don't you tell us about yours?
Sure. So my book is called Kill All Your Darlings, and it's a standalone. I've only written standalones. And this is the story of a college professor, a creative writing professor, who is struggling to get tenure. He suffered a personal tragedy in the past, so he's having writer's block, and the clock is ticking on getting tenure. Fortunately, or ultimately unfortunately for him, a couple of years before the book started, one of his very best students wrote a novel and turned it into him, and then conveniently disappeared and was given up for dead. So he publishes her thesis as though it's his, and he's going to get tenure and everything is all set. And on the day the book comes out, he comes home, and surprise, guess who was really still alive? The student who really wrote the novel. And it turns out that that novel that he published under his name implicates him in an unsolved murder in the town, and things get worse from there. So the lesson is, if you're going to plagiarize, make sure the person's really dead before you plagiarize from them. So that's Kill All Your Darlings.
All right.
David, wait, who wrote your book, David?
Well, that's a good question right there.
I can't reveal that yet, but 20 years after I'm dead, the truth will come out. So stick around for that. The only person who won't know is that person who got nominated and is actually dead.
Yeah. It's like, I can't count the number of people who emailed me after that massive cheese theft in Holland going, okay, where were you? I'm pleading the fifth on that one. Too many people know me for my love of cheese. All right. So now we know a little about the books, and we know Daryl at least believes that genres sleep with each other to come up with subgenres.
The genre loves another genre very much.
So these are what I'd like you guys to talk a little bit to each other about why you choose. And Carol, you started this talking about you wanted to be more commercial, and that's why you did this book that then started to be a series. Is there something particular that attracts you to writing series books or non-series books?
You know, I never planned on it to be a series. I thought it was a standalone novel. The first Star novel was called The Star Sting Scale. And I sent it off to the publishers, and they offered me a 3-book deal. And I had never had any idea of how incredibly stressful and unsettling that would be. I wrote the second one in the height of the pandemic in a shed in my backyard because my house was full of family that was unhappy because they couldn't go anywhere. And I swear I thought it would kill me. So I don't know whether I'm really, my hat is off to people who write series, like people, you know, the 20, 25 books out there more in a series. It's incredible. It was incredibly stressful for me to actually put a series together, but I do love the character. The character is I find really, well, A, funny, and B, the kind of female protagonist I'd like to see out there that I never did. So that's why I really enjoy it. But it's hard to come up with fresh ideas for your character to do, because when I was finished that first novel, I thought she'd done everything she was going to do. And lo and behold, she had to come out and do more stuff. So I found that very, very difficult.
Okay, somebody else want to talk about why they choose one or the other?
Well, I wanted to ask Alan. Alan, did you know you were starting a series, or?
No, it was news to me, to be honest. I wrote the first book, and then, as you say, I went along to Canongate, and they said, "Well, you know, we're giving you this contract." And I hadn't really thought about it, and they suddenly went, "Oh, well, you know, next book with the same people." And the problem I had is, had I known, I wouldn't have put so many bloody people in the first book that I had to find things for them to do in the second book and the third book. You know, 20 people I'm dragging along, trying to find some reason for them to be in all these books. So I think if I'd known, I'd have narrowed it down a bit. But I mean, it's kind of, in a way, a series is kind of easier because you half your criteria is already set up. You know who your main people are and everything, and you can go through it. I mean, it's just trying to make each one a bit, you know, to keep the interest going around it just being another book by that, you know, detective or whatever. So it has its pluses and its minuses, but as I said, my real problem is trying to find roles for people that should only have been in one book.
I kind of have the opposite. Well, the reason I think I write standalones mainly is because I end up killing most of my characters in the story. So I kind of have the opposite problem. If I was going to write a story, I'd be like, oh, there's 2 guys left. What do I do?
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've written, actually many years ago, my first book was published by a small press, and that was meant to be a series. I've written the second one, but it's just never been published for a variety of reasons. But since then, I've been writing standalones, and the main reason is kind of the opposite reason of what other people have said, is that no one asked me to. I mean, if they came and said, hey, go on with this character, I guess I would probably do it. But it's always just been my publisher. I've been with the same publisher the whole time, and they've just always wanted them to be standalones. I feel like there's some freedom in that, because each time, like you're saying, Alan, I don't have to remember what happened in the last one, because I don't remember what happened in the previous book. But then I, you know, then you're kind of creating from scratch in that way. So I'm sure there are pluses and minuses, whichever way it goes.
I've written books that are related, but mostly standalones, and mostly for like David was saying, it's the same reason that the guys from This Is Spinal Tap were asked, like, why didn't you make a sequel to This Is Spinal Tap? And their answer was, well, if you've done a thing as really as well as you can do it, and it still doesn't make any money, don't make a sequel. So if I don't get asked, like, it's like, this is so colossally successful that we have to have a second book. That doesn't happen. So it has to happen to me. So I almost all my books are standalones, but I also have the same problem that Laura said, which is a lot of times story arc wise, my person is either, if they're not dead, they're in such a different place than they were when they started that I'm not sure where it could go from there. And especially some of the science fiction books, they end up, the person is transformed in some way, or the world is different by the end of it. So then how do you recapture that flavor, which was all about a discovery of some kind? How do you go back to that? So it's hard, but I love series books. Like some of my favorite series books, like the Parker novels that go, sometimes they work because the character doesn't change that much and it's a slow growth, and you're in it for the long haul, seeing that character for years and years, so that, and I really enjoy falling back into those books. But I don't have the story engine. I've never come up with a story engine yet that would drive a huge series.
Now, which Parker novels?
Oh God. Now you're going to make me think of titles, because they're all
No. I just mean like the Parker as a writer or Parker as a character.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Parker is the character.
Okay.
The really the block novels that are really short, violent. Those are like candy. Those are my refresher books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because whenever somebody says the Parker novels, I'm always like, okay, well, do you mean the Robert B. Parker novels, or do you mean the John Connolly novels with, Charlie Parker as the...
Yeah, not the John Connolly novels, right.
All right. So, let's see. Laura, I know you write historicals. What attracts you to that period?
I've kind of shifted periods a little bit over the time. My favorite period is the Georgian period. And when I first started writing, I did just write very straight historical fiction, based on real people, real lives, but kind of fictionalized. But as I was developing as a writer and I started wanting to experiment with ghost stories, I sort of shifted into the Victorian, because I think it's just so synonymous with the ghost story, the era. And I thought, oh, great, I can have, fog and gaslights and all that stuff. So yeah, I kind of focus a bit more on the Victorian now. But I've always loved history, and I think my favorite books have tended to be classics and things set in the past. And I'm a big fantasy fan as well. So I think, in a way, writing historical can be a bit like writing fantasy, because you're world building, you're going to be taken to a different place. It's not to say I don't like books set in the modern day in the real world, but I kind of have enough of it when I'm living it. So it's nice. It's nice to go somewhere else. And I think especially with a mystery, you have more to play with in a historical period, because they don't have everything that we have to solve mysteries. It all becomes a bit more difficult.
Yes. I mean, even my husband and I were just talking fairly recently about a trip we took to Greece and how horribly lost we got, because, you're attempting to follow maps and things.
Yeah. And I think that helps if you're trying to create an unsettling atmosphere, because
it does
it out of their comfort zone as well, and they start to think, wow, what would I do?
Yeah, I say that's kind of one of the things that I think is important to think about when you're writing a mystery is how do you create that unsettling sort of atmosphere. Daryl, one of the things you did was, as you said, you created these hybrid creatures, each of which is distinctly different in personality and desire, but utterly unlike anything we've seen. So, David, did you have a strategy in going in towards creating something that was would kind of unsettle your readers?
I mean, a lot of my stories take place in mid-sized towns, or in Kill All Your Darlings, it's a college town. And so there are lots of different ways to make an atmosphere seem unsettling or creepy, but sometimes when it's a small town that seems kind of familiar and safe. We make an assumption sometimes that a smaller town is safe. And if you've ever lived in a smaller town, they're not. But somehow playing off of that, of the idea of if you peel the top off of the small, safe-looking town, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on beneath the surface. So that tends to be where I get the atmosphere from, is taking a familiar place and showing what's going on below the surface.
Okay. And Alan, do you have experience in the music world? Is that what led you to?
I do have experience in musical, but I didn't really want to write very much about music. I'd sort of done it for 20 years, and I was a bit. But he was just a nice character to put in as a kind of Z-leg. So there's little bits in the where he's always sort of just out of frame, when things are happening at the Monterey Pop. But so it's quite good fun to do that. And if you're a sort of rabid music fan, you'll sort of recognise the people coming in and out. But it was really just, I've always wanted to write about Glasgow, and I think Glasgow in the 70s. And the 70s in Britain and Europe was a really quite a strange period. And, that in big cities, the industries had collapsed, people were in real dire straits and everything was kind of up for grabs. And it genuinely seemed like there could be, a political revolution. There's Brigada Rossi and Badam, these sort of terrorist groups genuinely thinking that they could overthrow capitalism. So I think big cities in Europe in the 70s were kind of hotbeds of weird amalgams of people coming together. So it was quite a good time to write about. And, you can get a rock star in those places. So it was to try and look at that. And in a weird way, if you look back, all art or sort of popular art at that time had to be political. You had all bands had to have some sort of, scenario about how the world would develop and all this. So I quite like the idea that, the people genuinely thought things were up for grabs and they could change. So that seemed a good time to write about and examine that a bit, really.
Okay. Let me think for a second. We've talked about, Carol, you talked about how your character is kind of your stand-in in the world. Does anybody else think that way about the characters they write about? Do you imagine yourself in that role at all when you write?
I think every character has an element of the author in it, to a lesser degree. They might not always be like you, but you've always got a way into the character. Even if I've just got a character that likes dogs, I like dogs. You can find your way in.
I do want to echo something that Carol said earlier, which is, sometimes you borrow from your children's lives, like if you start stealing things from them. And that's just one of the risks of living with a writer, I think. You guys just got to get used to that. But for Moreau, so my kids are grown and they're both musicians. And so I wrote to my son and I said, look, I need a passionate defense of bubblegum pop and how it's actually more complicated than it is. And I said, could you just write me a rant and he's like, well, what kind of songs are they singing? Give me some titles. And I gave him titles and the kind of flavor of the songs they were. And he sent me back this 2 pages that I basically, should I confess to this, just pasted them into the book and tagged them for a certain writer who happened to be a pangolin human hybrid, but that's beside the point, who angrily defends how complicated the music of pop music is and how difficult it is to produce. And so I'm not telling writers that you should have children just to write your books. But I'm saying it's a great side benefit. Like you need to grow your staff is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, everybody's material. I did a similar thing with my daughter for my book that comes out in the fall, and about a very, very corrupted soul of a teenage girl. And I had her go through all her diary entries to make sure that she was authentic. But also, I interviewed women and girls and asked them all, what was the worst thing you ever did as a teenage girl, including myself. That's all in the book. So look out, if you're a friend of a writer, you're all material.
Yeah, that's my husband knows that because he's a firefighter, and I have definitely put some of the less well-known, let's say, social aspects of being a firefighter in there. Like the first time you go out on an active fire, you have to buy a bottle for the bar in the firehouse, and things like that. So, but he also came from the music world, so I myself was fascinated reading your thing, Daryl, and Alan's. And I came from academia, David. So Kill All Your Darlings rang some serious bells with me.
And the main character is a creative writing professor at a university in Kentucky, and I'm a creative writing professor at a university in Kentucky. So I was opening myself up for people to say, "Are you stealing your manuscripts from students?" So
yeah,
I'm not admitting that one way or the other.
Right.
Adds to the mystery.
Right.
That's where the mystery lies. Exactly.
Right.
We do have a question from the audience for you, David, that says, do you plan to continue writing in the academic world? Is that what, that this person loves your academic mysteries?
Oh. I had never written a book set in academia until these the Kill All Your Darlings. And then, yes, the next one is set in academia. And it's a locked room story about a small college, and 6 students have to take an exam to win a lucrative scholarship. And the only thing you have to do to take the exam is be locked in an aging house on the edge of campus for 8 hours on a Saturday afternoon with the wealthy donor to the school and the fundraiser for the school. And spoiler alert, people start to die once they're locked in the room. Otherwise, what would be the point? So that's the finalists, and that will be out in July. So yeah, at least for that one, sure. It's kind of like the series thing. My editor kind of steered me in the direction of another book set in academia, and I was like, hey, I'll go for it. So
right, the world I know, and
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of not necessarily series, but it's part of the appeal that people, or the appeal that certain authors have for certain readers, is the comfort that they get, not only with the characters, but also with the environment. Laura, you were talking about the Victorian period in history that some people feel really comfortable reading in. And, some people are attracted to reading about books set in academia, books set in locations, Scotland, France, England, wherever you set a book, you're attracting a different audience. Do you ever think about any of that before you write? Anybody?
One thing I've been thinking about, and I think everybody's been struggling with it, is how much of the pandemic do you bring in for the next book if it's set in the current world? How much you address. One of the great outs of writing historical books, so mine's set in 2001. Alan, I think yours is set in the 70s. So
yeah,
the Victorian era. So you get to dodge some things, and you don't have to decide, by the time the book comes out, what will be the state of the world? And so do you put the pandemic in the past? Do you have it still going on? Do you address it or not address it? That's always a consideration.
One of the great advantages of writing books in the 70s is nobody has a mobile phone. Nobody can Google anything. And you don't have to worry about the pandemic. So I'm quite smug about that. Actually, everyone's getting panic stricken. I don't have to, So I'm very glad I don't have to. So that's one of the pluses.
And there's, for anybody who wants to write police procedurals, there's no DNA. There's,
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm terrible at those things. I don't know anything about them. I just sort of make a bit up, and I sort of read other police books, and they're incredibly complicated, and it's all about collecting samples and all this and that. So I kind of avoid those bits, which luckily in the 70s isn't too many of them. So But yeah, and I think, to be honest, if my books were set now, they'd be about that thick, because you could just phone someone, because they spend their time wandering about trying to find someone to ask them something, or, I'm writing on a bit of paper. So I think it's probably very lucky for me that they were set then.
But even modern day can be like in the past within the time it takes to get published. Petra's Ghost, my first novel, was set on the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And while that is timeless, the smartphone that he used to Skype his sister in Ireland was, we don't even use the term smartphone anymore. It's just my phone. And so some of the technology that existed by the time it was published was out of date, and the vernacular was out of date. So it was amazing that just in the time between writing something and it getting published, it was out of date, so.
I've often said that writing near future science fiction is like writing weirdly inaccurate historical fiction, where they're just off by several key details.
This much.
I wrote a book called After Party that had a drug printer, a 3D drug printer. You sort of can buy these packs of chemicals online and then have recipes to make your own drugs at home, like you would with an inkjet printer. And I thought, I've invented this great technology. And by the time the book came out, like, somebody sent me an article from a guy who'd built it, and he'd been working on it for years. So it was like, well, okay, so the future doesn't exist.
Oh dear. Unfortunately, that will happen, and you just kind of have to get used to it. Let me see, Freeze. Okay, so questions from the audience. For each of you, what is the oddest or funniest thing you've learned doing research, even if it's not something that ended up in the actual novel you were researching?
Oh, wow. I come across so much stuff, just so much stuff. It's hard to narrow it down. But I think something I came across while researching this book, The Shape of Darkness, was all to do with the Victorian spirit mediums. And they went through a phase of trying to prove that they were creating these ghosts that came into the room. People were saying to them, actually, you're just changing in that cabinet into white clothes and coming out to pretend to be a ghost and going back in. So they went to great lengths to try and prove that they weren't doing that. And there was one particular girl, she got tied up, but that wasn't enough proof, apparently. So she actually sewed her own earlobe to the curtain of the cabinet to prove that she wasn't getting up. And that detail just stuck with me, because I just thought that's horrible.
Sadly, most of my books are about people who are drunk all the time. So I found out all these ways that people who have no money drink alcohol, and they used to bubble, like gas used for cooking, through water and drink that, and that would apparently knock you a bit nutty. Or they would boil down boot polish and drink that. Or they would drink perfume if it was cheap enough. Or they could drink hairspray dissolved in milk. So it's just this huge amount of things that people will find a way to get out their heads if they want to. So that's probably, I was going to say, the most useful thing. I mean, not useful for me personally, but useful for the books that people do that. So it's things like that. You think, God, how would you even think of that? So the ingenuity of people's desire to be drunk is always amazing.
Could you repeat that list? I'm writing them down.
They all work. I tested them all.
I had a book come out last year, set in the 30s and 40s, and a lot is about moonshine. And my whole family ancestors were moonshiners in Tennessee, and my uncle was still in his 80s, still evidently making stuff, because he let me sample some, and we were sitting around his table. But one of the weirdest details is that at the end of the pipe of the still, in order to get the flow of liquor to come out smoothly, you take the penis bone of a raccoon and you set that in there, and that evidently has the perfect shape to allow the the stream to come out correctly.
Who discovered that? That's what I want to know. And what were they doing?
Yeah, like how did they discover that? That's always the thing I want to know. It's like when there's something, a food that's poisonous raw, but okay, fine for you cooked. I always want to know who was like the guy who went, okay, I volunteer to cook it and then try it.
Well, there's always that one dumb guy who accidentally, like, it fell into the fire. He eats it. They all watch him to see if he dies. He doesn't die. They're like, hey, Frank didn't die. So let's.
It's the same guy who put the hairspray in the milk and drank it.
Oh, we've all been there.
I interviewed a funeral director, and we live in an area where there's a lot of limestone cliffs and stuff. So there's a lot of lime in the water. And she told me about how once they drain the blood out of the body, they have to add in all these dyes, red and blue and yellow and stuff, to make people look rosy and alive. And because of this thing in the water, because it was so hard when she moved to this area, she turned the somebody's loved one green. And she had to compensate for the lime in the water. So that was, I never even got to use that in the book. So everyone feel free. That was fabulous. It was great material.
All right. David, did you give us something or no? I don't remember.
No, I don't think I can top anything that's been said. I was wondering about the different animals they tried before they settled on the raccoon with that one. How'd they work their way to that? No, I mean, the only thing I can is I have my books are not procedurals and they're not heavy on any kind of forensic stuff, but occasionally you have to figure out something about how a body decomposes or whatever, or what's it like when you exhume a body. And I remember calling a funeral home to try to find out information about how they seal coffins when they're going to bury people and all that. And when you ask that question initially, how do you seal the coffin before you bury it? There's always that long pause. And then you immediately, then I say well, wait, I'm a writer. And then they're kind of oh, okay. And then they understand, right? And they but it's always that, how do you approach someone initially and say, I need this strange bit of information, and they're thinking why does this person want to know this?
I often wonder what the NSA thinks of my Google searches.
Yeah.
I've asked some doctors some really horrible questions.
Yeah, writers out there, find a doctor in your life. I got a doctor called Dr. Mora, and it's and she's also a writer. And so she's used to fielding all kinds of weird questions look, I need them to be shot and wounded, but not die immediately, but die eventually. What could be happening? She's oh, okay, here's what you do. And she's great that way.
Yeah.
I
don't know how many of our audience members are prospective writers or whatever, but I would say that's an excellent piece of advice. The same thing is also true of lawyers. But the one thing you want to know before you talk to them is what you want the outcome to be. Don't just call them and say, what happens if no. Call them and say, how can I make it so, as you said, he's shot in the chest, but he doesn't die? Because that's what they need. That don't leave it open-ended. Do we have people who want to ask anything? Can put questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box. And otherwise we'll just keep continuing until.
I wanted to ask Laura a question. You've got the furthest time period back. How much time do you spend research? Does that swallow a lot of time? Do you fall into rabbit holes of research, or do you have to limit it somehow?
I really do fall into rabbit holes and end up spending ages researching something that actually in a later draft I take out because it hasn't moved the story along. And that's quite heartbreaking because you think I've poured hours into this, but it just doesn't work. But I often come up with ideas when I'm doing research because I'll find a little snippet and think, oh, that's interesting, and it'll put my mind down a particular path for a story. So I'm researching all the time, really, but I tend to select the main topics I need to research for this story. And it really varies from book to book, to be honest, how long I spend doing the research. I think I'm sure you'll appreciate you're often writing more than one book at once, and so I feel like I'm constantly juggling research and writing, and it all merges into one. But I guess maybe a month to 2 months research.
Okay.
Okay. So a couple more questions for everybody. I don't know how many of you are actually attending the Edgars and how many are attending via Zoom or some other. For anybody who is attending, what's the thing you're most excited about? Anyone?
My dress.
See, that's the thing I'm most horrified by. Like, oh my God, I've gained so much pandemic weight. Now I have to buy a new dress.
Yes. I bought a red dress, and also it's just kind of exciting to be traveling again. In Canada, we've been shut down more than a lot of other people in other countries. We only recently removed the mask mandate. So the idea of traveling is huge, and going to New York City and everything, and a bunch of my friends are coming, and I have a really, really wicked red dress. So
awesome. Can't wait to see it.
And I'm looking forward to meeting the other writers there, which I'm hoping there's some of you that are coming too.
Yeah, I'm just going, and in a similar clothes-related instant, I realised that the dinner suit I had didn't fit me anymore, having sat during the pandemic eating things. So it's currently at the tailor, so I'm hoping they'll be able to rescue it. Otherwise, I'll be wearing something inappropriate, I would imagine, but hopefully I'll be able to let it out enough for me to fit myself into it. So, but no, as you said, Scotland's the same. We had an incredibly long lockdown, and I think just going somewhere, anywhere is just kind of exciting, having been stuck in the house for so long. So very much looking forward to being in New York for a couple of days, definitely, yeah.
Can't come, but it all sounds very glamorous. But if I join by Zoom, I'm wondering if maybe I should just dress up anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes.
I can't come. I'm just going to have a tux just from about here up. So
one of those T-shirt tuxes, where it's printed on there. And have any of you been before? No. Okay.
No, I've been to other awards, not because I've been nominated for an award. I've just been to the awards, but I've never been to the Edgars. So,
all right. So then, here's another question: how did you or your publisher decide that paperback or ebook was the way to go? Were you involved in that decision at all, or was that strictly your publisher's decision?
I had absolutely no idea. As usual.
No, I've got a different publisher in the UK to the US, and in the UK I come out in hardback first, but my US publisher goes straight to paperback, and no, I'm not involved in that.
For me, it was just that when I first got a book deal, it was paperback. It was straight to paperback. And I was just like, thank you for the book deal. I'm not going to discuss this with you. And then because the books did well enough to keep going in that format, and they wanted to get them into Target and places like that, that it just kind of stayed trade paperback. And so it's not, I mean, I've complained to them and said, like, what if we went hardcover? What if we did this? But, they're happy with the way things are going, so they don't listen to me.
Yeah, these are not things authors, for the person who asked this, these are not things authors get a great deal of say in. You might choose your publisher based on how they publish. As David said, his first contract was paperback, and that's kind of where it stayed. But you might look at a publisher and go, well, they only publish paperback or whatever, and you might decide, well, I don't want to go with them, but you don't have a lot of say. You don't.
Yeah, in my case, my book from Tor.com is a novella series, and that's novella, and so that's just the known format. They're not going to be hardback. They're going to be paperback. Almost all the Tor.com novellas are all paperback.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can hear it in the name of the book. I mean, or in the name of the publisher. There's Tor, and then there's Tor.com.
Yeah, which confuses everybody to no end, and especially because they also have the Tor.com website. It's very confusing. But
yes,
God bless them.
I'm published by a mighty but independent publisher in Canada, which I think if they put it out in hardback, that means the editing staff would not be allowed to eat. So I never expected it to do anything but go to paperback first.
Yeah, that's the same in the U.S. Publishers, small publishing houses, they just can't afford to do hardcover. Yeah. Okay, so okay, let me go back through these questions. Okay. For Carolyn, Carol, who is your cover artist? And for everybody, do you like your covers? Would you do them differently?
Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. Now I have to look and see her name. She's really awesome. She does a lot of graphic work, and Sanya Anwar. So she does kind of
you
graphic.
Hold the book up so that
I'm gonna hold the book up so you can see it. Okay, wait, hold on.
That's good.
Book cam. So it was interesting. I was asked in an interview if you were dressed for the Edgars to look like the cover of your book, what would you be wearing? And I said I'd be in yellow and passed out on the floor.
Yeah.
On brand.
But instead I'm like my first book and I'm in red. But yeah, they were, as you can see, they're trying to get a vibe. It's very much a modern novel written in the sort of 1940s classic noir. But yeah, with it kind of turned on its head because it's a female protagonist that has, is a little more multi-dimensional than that perhaps women were in books from that time. So the cover was really sort of, initially they were trying to get a reminiscent of a real retro feel. And so they went to Sonia, and she'd done a lot of like graphic novels and things of that nature, and comics like Daryl's talking about. And so she came up with these covers, which were just fantastic, and I loved them because they really popped in the stores, something very, very different from what you were seeing out there. So the third one, I suppose, will be in another monochromatic color that I will need to buy a dress in. I don't know.
How do the rest of you feel about your covers?
I mean, I'm hugely lucky because I'm published in the UK and the US. I get different covers for each, so I get this like wide range of covers for all my books, and I've liked all of them in different ways. But the one for The Shape of Darkness in the US, I really like because it's atmospheric, and it's kind of got this crystal ball shape behind the character holding the lantern. It's quite subtle, but when you know it's there, it's just really cool.
I felt very fortunate with my covers from Berkeley, and the one for Kill All Your Darlings I really, really like. In fact, for Kill All Your Darlings, this had never happened before. They gave me two options for the cover, and they were both really good. And so I picked the one that was even better, the best one. But I've been really happy with my covers. So yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry, I was going to say mine are pretty all the same. It's a sort of guy with a coat on from behind looking sort of into dirty city. And for some reason, he got a bit fatter in the last book, and his silhouette had got sort of wider and short. I was like, hang on a minute. So that was the only time I've ever objected to anything. Not that I'm obsessed or anything, but yeah, he normally looks the same. Then he looked like he'd been eating pies for about 2 years all of a sudden. So
can't imagine why.
I know, I
Yes.
changed it back.
So there's one more question here that we have time for. And then I'll just talk to you a little bit. Remember that these authors, to the audience, all these authors' books are available at www.murderbook.com/Edgar-PBO. You can find that in the chat section of the Zoom. So I know that I'm quite sure that Alan is going to answer this. I don't know. I don't care. I don't get any.
You've got my number already.
The question is, take us on the journey from your working title to the final published title. How much input did you have into the final published title?
It was the same. It's only changed once, which is the book after this one, if I can get this right, which is called The April Dead, as they go by month by month. And it was originally called The April Ceremony. And that was thought to be a bit too obscure, which is probably correct. And, you know, things like covers and titles, it's kind of such a specialized thing, and it really sort of, they boil it down and down and down. And sometimes you just kind of have to go, well, they probably know a bit better than me, as long as it's not horrendous. You know, there's not a lot of point in worrying about it, because book marketing is a really specific thing, you know, and if you insist that it must look like that, and then of course it doesn't sell any copies, then it's all your fault. So, you know.
I either have the titles and I fight hard for them, or I don't have any idea what the title should be, and it's a huge process to get to it. With this one, The Album of Dr. Moreau, it was like the title was nearly one of the first things that happened, and so it was like, you know, so I knew that had to be the title, and fought for that one.
Did they give you any trouble with it? Or did
no,
they?
well, my editor first said, "Do you think that's the title?" I'm like, "Yes." We have a good relationship, and he heard the distress of my voice about possibly changing it. Yeah, we kept it. So no real fight there. But I've lost other ones. I've had titles change. Sometimes it's because they're so close to a book that's just come out, that's done well, and you're like, it sounds too close, so we've got to switch. But most of the time, the titles have stuck from the first draft on.
Okay. And what's next for each of you?
Silence.
Nothing. We stopped.
Nap.
We stopped. No, I have two books coming out this year. The Finalist is my next adult suspense novel that will be out on July 5th. And then my first young adult suspense novel will be out in November with Source Books, and it's called She's Gone. So everybody will be sick of me this year with two books coming out.
In the immediate future, I'm going to go and have my dinner. But in the longer term future, there's a book just about to come out here called May God Forgive, which is the fifth one. So that'll probably be a couple of years till it comes out in America. So it's just trundling along really and keeping going.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of a book. It'll take forever to have that next one come out.
Laura?
My book's it's just changed title, actually, funnily enough, since we're talking about my next book. It was called Something Wicked. It's now called The Curse of the Muse. It's a haunted theatre novel. It's coming out in the UK next February, but I don't know about America. So watch this space.
I've got Eve's Rib coming out in the fall about a psychotic teenage daughter, or maybe she's just like any other teenage girl. You kind of go back and forth on that. So that's what I have coming out in the fall.
It's hard to tell at that age.
It is very hard to tell, and so that's what that book is about, trying to tell.
All right. And okay. So that we are just about out of time, and you can learn more about upcoming panels at www.edgarawards.com, And please join us on April 28th on our YouTube channel for the 76th Annual Edgar Awards ceremony. Goodbye, everybody. And thank you
Bye.
to all of our panelists so much.
Bye.
Hi, nice
Thank
seeing
you.
everyone.
Nice
See
meeting
you
everyone.
later.
Alan, see you at the awards.
Yes,
Checking out your tailoring.
and I'll be the one bursting out my outfit.